Blessings, good evening. We hope you are all well, especially those in Queensland who might be underwater, or at least drying out, having been underwater. We hope that you're safe and that your property survives. It's not easy being in a flood, but hopefully it's just a temporary thing and can try and get back to normal as soon as possible. It's Q&A night as well, because we weren't able to do it last night, so a few questions have come in tonight. Can Ajahn kindly explain the difference between Sakkaya Ditthi and Asamimana? Well, as we know, the Buddha talked about mental defilements, the different mental qualities that are the cause of suffering. He talked about mental defilements in many different groupings. And so Sakkaya Ditthi is often referred to as a fetter, one of these fetters that bind us to the world. The first one, actually in a list of 10, Sakkaya Ditthi means the view that this body is a self, or the belief that this body is a self. Kaya means body, Ditthi is a belief or a view. So that's a fetter that binds us to the world and is a cause for suffering. Because as long as you take this body as self, and then anything happens to it, and that includes the feelings and the memories and the thoughts you have based on this human person you have, and the attachment to the view that this is a self, this is me, then we start to get suffering. We don't want anything to happen to this body, and yet every day it gets older, it experiences pain and hunger, tiredness every day. Sometimes we get sick, injured, and one day we've got to die. None of that is what we want. So that's where suffering comes from, isn't it? Because you are bound to the world by attaching to this body as self, and you have that view, then you're setting yourself up for suffering. So the Sotapannas sing through that, and they let go of that view, because they know the body is actually not a self. It's a collection of elements, 4 elements, earth, air, fire, water. And they are not a self, not owned by a self, they're not part of a self, they're just natural elements. So the more we investigate that with mindfulness, with wisdom, the more we erode away Sakkaya Ditthi, and the less we suffer. Asamimana is certainly very close to Sakkaya Ditthi, but mana means conceit, the conceit I am. So in the very coarsest level, well, very close to Sakkaya Ditthi, it's that thought I am. And usually mana, conceit, manifests in relation to other people. So I'm the same as you, I'm better than you, I'm worse than you. Because once you've got a sense of self, I am, then you start comparing, and that's where it most obviously comes up. So that includes pride. We're proud of who we are, who we identify with being. So if you didn't have Sakkaya Ditthi, already Asamimana would disappear, a lot of it. Maybe not all of it, but the coarsest kind of conceit disappears when you let go of Sakkaya Ditthi. But they tend to come up as a pair. We say Sakkaya Ditthi and Mana. They kind of the coarsest manifestation of the sense of self. So what makes us argue with other people? All our views and our opinions and the sense of importance we give to our beliefs and our views. So whether it's politics or religion or your favorite soccer team or whatever it is that you're attaching to and your views around that, well, that will generate both the attachment to the view and the belief, I'm right, this is right for me, and then also the sense of self, the mana, the conceit. Of course, we can have inferiority conceit as well, so sometimes we feel we're inferior to someone, and that's another form of suffering. We have inferiority complexes and just that sense that someone else has more worth than us, they're worth more than us, whether it's in terms of material terms or in terms of their knowledge, or we say their barami, that kind of thing. So even meditators and Buddhists will be sometimes comparing each other with conceit. But conceit also goes up to a very refined level, because it's actually one of the very last fetters that you abandon before attaining Nibbana. So the anagami is contemplating the very refined kind of self, sense of self, what you might call just the sort of the wisp of self, the essence of self. The anagami, the non-returner, they no longer attached to the body as self. They no longer have self-view. They're no longer attached to the pleasures of the senses, sense objects, the reactions and mental states of liking and disliking based on the senses, based on the attachment to the body. That's gone. They've seen through that, seen it as impermanent, not self. But there's still a subtle mana, subtle conceit left. So sometimes they compare it to the flower and its scent. Like if you have flowers on the shrine, behind me there's flowers. So Sakkaya Ditthi is like the flower. It's there, you can see it, it's the colour, the shape. If you take the flowers away from the hall, you may still get a subtle waft of the scent of the flower. And that's like the refined kind of conceit that the anagami, the non-returner, has to see and notice and observe and let go of before they can attain Nibbana. So there's something there, but it's hard to put your finger on. Because anagami, they don't have any more attachment or identification with the body, but they may have some subtle attachment to the bliss of samadhi. So it could be jhana, rupa jhana, or arupa jhana, the formless samadhi. You know, the happiness, the bliss of that, the detached states of samadhi. And of course ignorance, avijja, the very ignorance of all aspects of the Dhamma. They may have developed a lot of knowledge and understanding of the Dhamma on many levels, but there'll still be a little bit of ignorance in the mind, which supports this conceit of self, and the anagami abandons them together. So it's still defilement. So even an anagami, a non-returner, can still have some defiled thinking, some defiled misunderstanding of the truth, and therefore they still have some suffering left. But their job is to root it out, investigate, practice vipassana to the highest level. You know, seeing anicca, dukkha, anatta, seeing all their phenomena of particularly mental phenomena, mental qualities as impermanent, unsatisfactory basis for suffering, and being not self. If they can do that, then they reach Nibbana. So only the Arahant has no more mana as a me mana, or conceit of I am, it's gone. So they're without this sense of self. That's why anagamis are pretty nice people to live with. Arahants are very nice people to live with, because there's no more ego, self, conceit. So they're without self. Those normal manifestations of conceit or self-view are gone. So Ajahn Chah used to say, one who's reached Nibbana doesn't have anything more to argue about. There's no more conceit. There's no more opinion, I'm better than you, worse than you, I'm right, you're wrong. There's nothing more to argue about, because their mind is just seeing Dhamma or being Dhamma all the time. The conceit is gone, so there's no need to argue about anything. Even if someone is very argumentative, like the Buddha would often meet people who are quite argumentative, want to prove themselves that they know better, they're right, the Buddha's wrong in one way or another. But the Buddha wouldn't argue. Sometimes he would be silent, sometimes he would give a very clear teaching of what he understood, what he knew. Sometimes he could show the person where their thinking was wrong. Sometimes he couldn't. And he'd accept, and there's just no point talking because the person wouldn't understand. But there's no conceit left. So these two kinds of defilement, they're very closely related, but they're not exactly the same. So another question, can Ajahn also further explain the meaning of practicing Dhamma in accordance with Dhamma? Yoni manasikara and Asawa. So we have a kind of pariyatti lesson tonight based on these questions. So practicing Dhamma in accordance with Dhamma. Dhammanupatipata. So basically practicing Dhamma in accordance with Dhamma is practicing Dhamma for the end of suffering, as opposed to practicing Dhamma creating suffering. But it depends where you're on the path, how many defilements, craving, attachment you have left, how coarse, how refined, what particular practices and insights you need to develop. Where you're at in your practice, where you're at in your karma. So any practice of the path, sila, samadhi, panya, and all the different factors of the path, which are all cultivated to bring the mind to the point where it can be released from suffering. So any part of the path is really practicing Dhamma in accordance with the Dhamma. And it will be for the reducing of attachment, becoming, birth, suffering, rather than to increase craving, attachment, becoming, birth and suffering. So that's a way you can reflect on what you're doing. Anything you're doing, any kind of practice you're doing, you have to ask yourself, am I increasing my craving and attachment here or reducing it? Is this leading to more birth? More becoming, more birth, or less. So if the practice you're doing is increasing your conceit, say, as going back to the last question, you're becoming more proud, more puffed up, bigger ego, bigger conceit, bigger sense of self. Something's not quite right, and you're probably not practicing Dhamma in accordance with the Dhamma. You may be practicing what we call adhamma, without the Dhamma, without clarity, without wisdom maybe. Maybe what you're doing is not leading to insight into the true nature of phenomena, seeing things as anicca, dukkha, anatta. Maybe you're increasing the biases of the mind, you're making the mind more greedy, more attached, more angry, more deluded. So it's even possible when you do practice good Dhamma, practice the Dhamma correctly for a while, still subtle defilements can slip in, can't they? So the Buddha said you can practice sila, say you keep 5 precepts. If you're a monk or a nun, you've got your patimokkha, your rules of discipline and training. You practice them well, and that's good, and they're helping for you to restrain defilements, let go of defilements, increase your sense of detachment, dispassion, peace of mind. That's all good. But then, having kept precepts and rules, training rules for a while, you might have a pride or a conceit slip in. Oh, I keep these rules very well. And maybe you look at other people and you say, I keep them better than those people. And if that happens, the Buddha said, you are a fool. Even though you're keeping your precepts. If you start getting puffed up and full of pride and going to say, oh, I'm better than them because I keep my precepts better than them, well, you're forgetting the purpose of it all, and you're starting to create more of a sense of self or conceit based on your practice of virtue or the training rules, the monastic training rules and so on. So you're going backwards. You're creating a sense of self. You're creating the causes for suffering. And it's possible, isn't it? Even you can get very virtuous Buddhists who look down on other Buddhists who are not so virtuous and get angry with them or critical of them or shun them or look down on them or whatever. And that's not the purpose of the practice. We have to be on guard for even the most subtle kinds of conceit that slip into our thinking. So you're not practicing the precepts or the training rules to boost your conceit. You're practicing to erode away your conceit. So Dhammanu patipata, Dhammanu Dhamma patipata, practicing Dhamma in line with the Dhamma, is you're practicing precepts as a foundation for purifying the mind, removing those particular unwholesome intentions from your mind, developing mindfulness, developing states of calm, samadhi, and then developing insight. You're not doing it to boost your ego, or to feel better than others, or to feel worse than others. So that's an example. Same with dana. We're not practicing dana to increase our sense of pride and conceit and self, to become the world's best dana giver, so that we can walk down the road feeling better than everyone else. We practice dana to let go of our own attachment, our own stinginess, our own selfishness. That would be practicing Dhamma in accordance with the Dhamma, rather than to boost our pride and our sense of self. And the same with samadhi. If you develop states of samadhi, you can still have a subtle sense of self forming, and then if you attach to that, and you may have that feeling, I have my samadhi now, I have this bliss, I can attain bliss at will, I'm better than them, I'm special, everyone should look to me as a special Dhamma practitioner because I've got samadhi. Then it's no longer Dhamma in accordance with the Dhamma, and now it's going in the wrong direction. It's going for more attachment, more delusion, darkness. It's another way. When you're not Dhamma, when you practice Dhamma in accordance with the Dhamma, it leads to the mind becoming bright, radiant, free from the hindrances, free from defilements. If we are not practicing Dhamma in accordance with Dhamma, then the mind gets darker, less radiant. Something's going wrong. Oh, and there were other parts of the question, weren't there? What is Yoni manasikara? Well, we translate it as wise reflection, skillful reflection, reasoned reflection. It's the development or cultivation of the ability of the mind to reflect on the truth, on Dhamma, as part of the practice. So we always give the example when you're learning Yoniso Manasikara, learning reason reflection in the beginning of your practice, you're learning to reflect on, say, the use of the requisites, the basic necessities of life, like you're reflecting, why do I eat food? What's the purpose of food? It's for nutrition, to give you strength, good health, so you can practice the Dhamma, rather than you eat food for pleasure, to show off to your friends that you're a gourmet and you know all about food. Just for the pleasure of it, just to make yourself fat or look good, whatever. The purpose of food is really just to give you health, to practice the Dhamma. That would be wise reflection as you eat or use food. And the same with clothes. Why do we wear clothes? It's to keep us warm, protected from the sun, the weather, to keep us, to protect our modesty, so we're not ashamed walking down the street naked. That's wise reflection in the use of clothes, isn't it? But most people forget this and they just wear clothes to look good, look smart, impress people. It's an extension of your personality, so your style of clothing reflects who you are. And that can be in many ways. You can have very expensive clothing because that's the kind of person you're projecting to the world. Or you could be like me when I was a teenager. I'd buy everything from jumble sales, garage sales, second-hand shops to save money. So I was projecting an image of someone with no money because I didn't have any money. And I walked down the street with all this second-hand clothes. But sometimes you get bargains, so then people go, oh, that's really cool, and you didn't spend much money on it. But anyway, you're forgetting the purpose of clothing. You're just wearing clothing to impress or look good or feel good in one way or another. Whereas clothing is simply just to keep you warm and protect your modesty. Same with accommodation, your house, how much our house is an expression of who we are, who we think we are, who we want to be. If it's a small house and it's not to our liking, then we feel inferior, feel unhappy with our status and so on. If we've got a big, massive house, far too big for our needs. Like someone yesterday was saying, oh, I've got a house with 5 bedrooms and I'm living in it on my own. It's like, maybe it's time to downsize. But you have to think about it, don't you? What is the purpose of accommodation? It's just to protect you from the elements, and so you've got a place to practice Dhamma. So very simple reflections that we can bring up every day, and this is training in wise reflection. When you meditate, you're wisely reflecting on hindrances. How do the 5 hindrances arise? What's their nature, their characteristic? How can I abandon them? Recognizing them. Sometimes you have to learn what a hindrance looks like, how it appears in the mind. See the suffering it causes you, how it distracts you, makes your mind agitated or sleepy or caught into one mood or another. We reflect on the hindrances, understand how they arise, how to abandon them. We reflect on the Dhamma all the time. We can reflect on the Dhamma of impermanence, for example. Just contemplate and see impermanence in our experience through our day. We can notice how our mood changes, feelings in the body and the mind come and go, pleasant, neutral, unpleasant. We can contemplate the mental states. Sometimes we have very positive thoughts, sometimes very negative thoughts, sometimes we feel at ease and happy, sometimes we feel very agitated or anxious. Start to wisely reflect on our mental states, physical state of the body, mental states, and see the impermanent changing nature of these things. And on you can go. Wise reflection is something you train in to help understand what is the path of practice, how to apply it, how to succeed with it, and how to overcome the obstacles. At every level of our practice, we're training in wise reflection. And it's supported by mindfulness. When you're mindful, you can reflect well because you're paying attention to what's going on. When we're not very mindful, we tend to fall into unwise reflection. The opposite of yoniso manasikara is ayoniso manasikara, and it means giving unwise attention to mental states and objects that cause defilements to arise. So, say if you're a monk, at mealtime you walk down into the kitchen and you see your favorite food on the table and your eyes are drawn to it. Sometimes it's like somebody's put glue between your eyes and that piece of food, and all you can do is look at it. If you were really unrestrained, maybe your tongue would hang out. You become completely intoxicated with that piece of food. That would be unwise attention. So not mindful, not restrained, not attending wisely to that image or the smell or the form, the sight of that food. You're like in a cartoon, you're sort of just fixed on it. If you're mindful and attending wisely, maybe you notice there's that food, you know that's a food that you liked before, you understand that, but you don't dwell on it, you don't let your eyes dwell on it, you don't give it unwise attention, you just see it and then you let go. Keep mindful, keep restrained. Keep your eyes elsewhere if need be. Monks do a lot of that. And they walk down the street and they see a pretty woman maybe, keep your eyes somewhere else. This is something Ajahn Chah was really fast with when monks were in the monastery, and maybe they're sitting there waiting for the meal and there's a lot of lay people, maybe there's a pretty woman sitting there and then a monk starts looking at her. It's natural, isn't it? Your eyes are drawn to that which is attractive in a human form, or it could be art, or it could be music in the ears, whatever. But say there's a pretty person sitting there and you're drawn to them, looking at them, then the monk who was caught out, he wouldn't realize Ajahn Chah has seen him, so Ajahn Chah is looking at him. And then the monk is looking at the pretty person, then realizes he's lost his mindfulness, unrestrained. And then the monk looks at Ajahn Chah, sees Ajahn Chah looking, and then the monk feels terrible. He caught me looking at the pretty woman. It's like embarrassment, because you know you've given into a defilement, your sensuality has been aroused through unwise attention and a lack of wise reflection, lack of mindfulness. So monks are practicing this all the time with their senses, wisely reflecting, establish mindfulness. In the lay life it's harder, isn't it? Because no one's doing it. And we even encourage each other. So, if you're a monk and you're hanging around with lay people for a while, sometimes you feel awkward, because if you're with a group of guys out in the world, maybe they're all looking at some woman going, wow, she looks nice. You're a monk, you feel uncomfortable, because they're giving into that sensuality. As a monk, you don't want to do that. You're training yourself not to do that, and there's no wise reflection. Maybe they can even be a bit cruel or exploitative, or just seeing members of the opposite sex just as objects. And that's going on all the time, isn't it? And not with just people, it's with material things we want to acquire. If you've got no mindfulness and no wise reflection going on, you just think, I like that, I want that, or I hate that and don't want that. You also get, it comes up with hatred and aversion, so you get that with different views and opinions, like now politics, or views on things, the way the country is run, the way the world is run, wars, all kinds of things. People often they're falling into different biases of attachment, liking, disliking, aversion, attraction, often without much wise reflection going on. So the Buddha encouraged us to develop the wisdom faculty through wise reflection, and this is a way out of suffering. It's one of the main factors. Where does Yoni Manasikara come from? Listening to the Dhamma a lot, spending time with Dhamma practitioners, Kalyana Mitta, studying, so reading the suttas and so on. This will help you develop Yoni Manasikara. The last question was, what are the Asawa? Asawa, there's quite a few different words of translation for Asawa. Like all the mental defilements, they're translated and described in different ways at different times by the Buddha. But the Asawa sometimes translate as the inflows. Again, through your senses, you see something pleasant, you get an inflow of sensual desire, I like that. Or you see something unpleasant, I don't like that. This is the asawa we call karma asawa. The asawa, the inflow of sensuality. And they're also called the intoxicants sometimes. They're intoxicating, the asawas are intoxicating. So the asawa of sensuality, karma asawa, it's intoxicating. Sometimes it's called a fermentation. The comparison being made with any kind of grain or fruit that can be fermented into alcohol. So if you make alcohol, often you keep it fermenting for many weeks, months, don't you, to get the alcohol out of that bit of grain or fruit. So it's like those qualities in the mind that are just fermenting and intoxicating you. And because karma asawa is the first of the asawas, it's the most sort of obvious and the most commonly experienced one, because it's just coming up all the time through your life. You're constantly seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, smelling, and desire is being stimulated. And that's desire for and against, because we don't like some things and we like other things. But our asawas are being stimulated all the time, and they're just kind of fermenting there because it's happening every day. You see, you hear, you taste, you touch. So it's like the cause for this intoxication is just bubbling away. Sometimes called the pollutants as well, because they pollute the mind. So your mind is not pure, equanimous, detached, dispassionate. Your mind is intoxicated with love and hate for different sense objects. So karma asawa is the first of the asavas. The second asawa is bhava asawa, bhava, becoming. Basically, it's the craving for becoming, it's the craving for existence. I want to live, and I want to live according to my desires in a certain way. So if we're very sensual, and most of us are, we want to live in a sensual realm where we can see, hear, taste, touch, smell. We don't want that taken away from us. So we fear death, we fear the end of existence, we don't want to stop existing. We want to carry on seeing, tasting things, smelling things that we like, and we seek them out all the time, and we want to keep on living so we can have more sensual experience. That may change if you develop meditation, particularly, and develop skill with calming your mind, developing one-pointedness. You may experience jhana. Rupa jhana, but jhana is the form, jhana is a form or fine material form, or arupa jhana, immaterial jhanas based on objects, immaterial objects like boundless space, consciousness, and so on. But it creates another kind of desire for existence based on the bliss, the peace, the experience of those jhanas can still be a craving for existence. You'd like to be born in a Brahma realm, be a Brahma god, sitting up there in bliss. Who wouldn't? Very enticing. So there's the coarser kinds of existence, the more refined kinds of existence, but it's all craving for existence, asawas, and it's bubbling away, fermenting away deep in our consciousness, our citta. The last of the asawas is avijja-asawa, ignorance. Ignorance of the Four Noble Truths, ignorance of the way things are. Ignorance darkens the mind. So it's the opposite of wisdom, which brightens the mind, brings the mind to the radiance. The Buddha said wisdom is the greatest radiance there is, even brighter than the sun, brighter than a fire. Ignorance is darkness, darkens the mind down, deludes the mind, holds the mind, traps the mind in repeated birth and death. This is the nature of the asavas. The things that defile the mind, keep the mind dark, ignorant, not seeing the Four Noble Truths, not penetrating the Four Noble Truths, subject to birth, death, and suffering. So, karma asawa, Bhavasawa and Avijjasawa. Who's abandoned the asavas? The arahant. Kinasawa. They call an arahant a kinasawa. Without the asavas, gone beyond the asavas, or cleaned up their mind. If you call the asavas pollutants, one of their descriptions, well, you've cleaned up the pollution. And we all want to clean up the pollution of the ocean, clean up the pollution of cities, all kinds of places, clean up. That's a good thing as well. That's the material realm, but we still have to clean up the pollution of our minds, which is the asavas. So the arahant is the only one who's truly done that. They're a kinasawa. So the night of the Buddha's enlightenment, they say he developed 3 knowledges sitting under the Bodhi tree. The first was the knowledge of past lives, pubbeni wasanu satiyana, so knowledge of recollection of past lives. Second was jutupapadayana, the knowledge of the arising and passing away of beings. Someone dies from this realm, you could see where they are reborn according to their karma. The last of the yanas was the most important, the asavakaya yana, the knowledge of the destruction of the asavas. So the pollution is cleared up, the intoxicating fermentations have been detoxed, the inflows have stopped. So the arahant sees, he may see something beautiful, or she may see something beautiful or ugly, but that doesn't stimulate the arising of asavas anymore. Beauty is known, but it's not attached to it. It doesn't stimulate craving, attachment. No more ignorance is being conditioned out of experience. The mind is pure, seeing everything as anicca, dukkha, anatta, not self, as impermanent, unsatisfactory, not self, not to be clung to. So the asavas are no longer there. Maybe time for one more question. The Buddha said that if people knew the value of giving the way he did, they would not eat a single meal without sharing it with others. So what exactly is the value of giving that the Buddha knew of that we don't know? Well, the Buddha in his wisdom kind of could see the whole of the path that leads from a starting point of ignorance, stress, suffering, unhappiness, but then he's practiced to the place of awakening or enlightenment, so he knows the end of the path and he knows the path that leads to get there. So he knows what is the path and what isn't. He knows what causes suffering, what ends suffering. He knows the Four Noble Truths completely, he's penetrated them. This is why he can talk about defilements, asavas, sakkaya ditthi, all these terms so well and so clearly, because he's really seen and understood them through his own mind, through his own experience. So why would the Buddha talk about the value of giving? Well, because it's quite integral to this path, it's central to this path. Like one of the first defilements that you let go of on this path, that a sotapanna, the stream enterer, the first level of enlightenment, has let go of, is this quality we call macharya, stinginess, possessiveness. So stinginess with one's material things, they say with one's family and friends, stinginess with one's knowledge, stinginess in all its forms, the possessiveness, the attachment in all its forms on that basic greed, selfishness, the sort of coarsest kind of selfishness has been abandoned. So a sotapanna, so for someone who's attained the first level of enlightenment, they're very generous. People ask Sotapannas for something and they generally give if they can, if they've got it. They ask for knowledge, they'll give knowledge. They won't be stingy with their knowledge. They'll share the Dhamma freely, easily. They're not like keeping it secret. They'll give it to people who can benefit from it. They'll share what they have materially, so they're very unselfish, share their time, share their goodwill, so they don't hold on to grudges. They forgive. They give forgiveness. They give peace in the sense they're harmless. They won't transgress the 5 precepts. There's a lot of giving in the first level of enlightenment because these coarser kind of defilements have been abandoned because they've seen the suffering of stinginess, possessiveness, attachment on those levels. So monks, we even have a rule: we're not allowed, if we know our family or a member of the family or all of the family members are Sotapannas, we have to be very careful not to ask them for things because they'll always give. And there were times in the past when monks who may not have been Sotapannas themselves, they still have desire, they want things. Maybe they want to do good projects, good things, but they need certain things for that. They need food, they need robes, they need requisites so that they can practice and do good. But they still have a little bit of a desire there maybe that they haven't seen. So sometimes they go and ask from a family who's a family with a Sotapanna in it, so they always give. And they can even burden that family. Maybe the family are not very well off. So the monk asks and asks and they give and give and give, and they can become poor or in difficulty because of it. So we actually have rules stopping us doing that. And it's a basic principle of the Dhamma. If someone's very generous as a monk, you have to be very careful not to ask, not to exploit their generosity. So Sotapannas are like this. People who have seen the first stage of Dhamma, of enlightenment, they've let go of Sakkaya Ditthi, this view of the body as a self, and that by extension as their possessions, their money, their wealth as self. They've let go of that view. So they become very generous, kind people. And they're very aware of other people's suffering, because they're less selfish now and less stingy, possessive, or they see other people are suffering, so they tend to help, be generous, kind. So this is where we get this understanding of the role of generosity, charity of heart, generosity of heart, as well as generosity in material terms. It pervades the whole of Buddhist practice from start to finish. Whether you've got a lot or a little to give, it doesn't matter, it's more a state of mind. So you see that with monastics. Monastics often they've got nothing in terms of giving, but they still can share what little they have. So as a monk or a nun, you're given food every day, hopefully. We tend to share very easily. If someone else hasn't got much food, you learn to share. So Ajahn Chah was very skilled in setting up monasteries in this way, to encourage letting go of stinginess and attachment and possessiveness. So we share things, we share the requisites that are offered, go into a central store and then are shared out with the Sangha. The food is shared out, it's put on the table, everyone gets a chance to eat the food. The work in the monastery is shared out so that, not just one person does all the work looking after the monastery and everyone else just sits back doing nothing with their, leaning on their hands with their feet up in the air. We share jobs, we share duties, responsibilities, teaching responsibilities we share. We share things in the monastery to teach us to let go of both Sakkaya Ditthi and stinginess, possessiveness. And this is coming from the Buddha, and Ajahn Chah in his wisdom set up the monasteries in this way to facilitate and help that. Because we need to let go of our stinginess. And the Buddha could see whenever you're doing that, you're practicing the path, you're going closer to Nibbana. If you can't let go of the coarser kind of things you're attached to, such as You don't know how to share material things, you don't know how to share your kindness, your knowledge, your advice. Well, when you're practicing meditation to develop deeper states of stillness and calm, you're not going to let go of your possessive mental attachments and possessiveness, are you? Because you can't do it on the outside, you're not going to be able to do it on the inside. So you notice people who attain deep states of samadhi have already learned how to practice generosity. They tend to be not very possessive and attached to their things because they're developing inner peace and happiness from their meditation. So it goes hand in hand. If you're practicing the Buddhist path, you're also practicing dana. And so even up to the level of fully awakened arahants, you meet arahants like Ajahn Chah, Ajahn Mahabua, or these other monks that are still living today who are well practiced. They tend to be very generous people. They give their Dhamma to a lot of people. They share their Dhamma. They often arrange different kinds of charity, arranging to help good causes, organize the giving away of things to other monasteries or groups of people or to villages and places that are in need, groups of people who are in need, like the poor, the sick, and so on. They often are doing a lot of charity work. So you could even say, sort of, what does an arahant do? What do you do after you're enlightened? Well, you help people. It's just natural. If you've got no selfishness and attachment, well, then you tend to have a lot more time to help other people. And they're very compassionate, so they're looking at ways to help other people and can be quite creative with that. And that's one of the nice things about living with Buddhist monastics is they tend to help each other and they help lay people and to be kind, generous. So you're seeing that all the time, so it kind of develops a very good atmosphere. Another thing is, you may be practicing Dhamma for a while before you get enlightened. So you need some good causes and conditions to help you along the way. So the generosity we practice, sharing a meal, sharing this, sharing that, this is setting up good causes and conditions for the long term that will come back and support you in your practice. So if you've given food or shared food with others, well, later on in your practicing, you need to be supported with food, it will come. You share Dhamma and you support the sharing of Dhamma, then other people, when the time comes, you'll receive Dhamma teachings and you'll meet with Dhamma teachers and you'll have access to the Dhamma. So it's like, we say it's like the requisites for your long journey towards Nibbana. You need to make dana and make merit and share things and practice generosity to support yourself, your future self. We know there is no self, but we have many selves through our time practicing until we reach Nibbana. So whatever dana you do today, you're supporting your future self. You're letting go of some of your attachment, you're creating very good causes and conditions, you make friends, you help other people, they'll often come back and help us. You're setting up the good karma to support you as well as helping other people. So through our life we need to do that. It makes life better, doesn't it? When you share and you help others, you feel good, they feel good, life is a better life. It's the opposite of war. What does war do? Destroys everything. Destroys people, destroys property, destroys land, destroys buildings, destroys countries. When you make war, what is the karmic result of that? Is eons and eons of suffering. You kill people, you destroy things. You're making a lot of bad karma for yourself and others. You make misery. Everyone is unhappy with war. Nobody is happy with war. It's just destruction. It's not a good thing in any form. Practice of generosity, kindness and compassion is the opposite. It makes people happy. We help each other. The world progresses, countries progress, society progresses. When are we going to get the message and stop the wars and start helping each other? Obviously many people understand this lesson, but some people are forgotten it. So it just makes sense to share, be generous. I like the reflection one teacher once told me, said, do you know why people are born in countries where the society is reasonably wealthy, there's good education, healthcare system, people have enough to eat, they got a place to stay? The karma they made making merit with a Buddha in the past life, giving food to a Buddha, supporting the Sangha, brings them back to be born in a place where they have enough to get by. They may not be super rich, but they're well off enough, not to be struggling. That's the barami, the goodness, the good result of making merit with the Buddha and the Sangha. It'll come back to help you. And you're born in a place where you can get enough food to eat. Because unfortunately a lot of people in the world aren't. A lot of people are born without access to health care. They have no money, or they're born in a war zone where everything is destroyed. Not everyone is born in the same kind of good situation. But making merit with the Sangha and the Buddha, this is one of the results that comes back. So I'll leave that today and encourage you all to practice more dana, more generosity, because it will support you right through your practice till you reach Nibbana. And we'll leave the Q&A session there today and wish you all well. May you all be at peace and happy, safe, protected.